Welcome to the lecture over speciation and cladograms. What is speciation? Speciation is the formation of a new species. Well, first, what's a species? A species is a group of organisms that breed with each other and produce fertile offspring in the natural environment. Speciation then occurs when a population that has been isolated for an extended period of time. They become reproductively isolated from one another. So that's when two members of two populations cannot interbreed and produce fertile offspring anymore with one another. Well, how does reproductive isolation occur? How is it that these species end up becoming isolated from one another, which ends up in speciation creating a new species? Well, there's three main ones we're going to talk about. First is behavioral isolation. The second is geographic isolation, and the third is temporal isolation. So behavioral isolation means that the courtship rituals or their other behaviors are different between the two organisms. So an example is the eastern meadowlark will not respond to the western meadowlark mating songs. This is the western and this is the eastern. And so since they will not respond to one another, they're not going to end up mating with one another. And so they're going to become more different over time, and that creates a new species, causing these to be different in their population with two separate species. Here's another example of the behavioral isolation. You're going to watch this after this lecture video, so I have it posted right underneath. Next is geographic isolation, and this is when the population is separated by a geographic barrier, like a river changing course, mountains rising, anything that's physically causing a barrier between two pieces of land. So an example is one population of squirrels could be divided into two or smaller populations by the formation of the Grand Canyon, because you ended up with a huge barrier in between. The last type of isolation is temporal isolation, and this means that the populations reproduce at different times, and it can be different seasons or just the time of day. So one example is some plant species flower at different times of the year. So one might flower in the spring, another one might flower in the fall, and so you're not going to see them mating with one another because they are reproducing at different times. Another example is similar frogs could end up only reproducing in the morning, while another one will only reproduce in the middle of the night, and so they're going to be temporally isolated. What's another example of speciation we've talked about? We've talked about Darwin's finches. Darwin said that they descended from a common ancestor from the mainland of South America, and then natural selection ended up shaping their beaks as they adapted to the different foods on the different islands. Just like here. And so over time, because they were isolated geographically, they were isolated either behaviorally or by the food that they ate, you ended up seeing different species forming from the initial species, which is causing speciation. Next, we're going to talk about phylogenies, which is how we classify these organisms. So Darwin's ideas about descent with modification gave rise to the study of phylogeny, or evolutionary relationships among organisms. And so these are phylogenetic trees or cladograms. We're going to read these in this unit. You need to know how to read these. And the way that you read them is like reading a family tree. The root of the tree is the ancestral lineage, or the common ancestor. Then, as you go up the tree, the tips of the branches, so the 1, the 2, and the 3, represent the descendants of that ancestor. So it goes over time. So as you move from the root to the tips, you are moving forward in time. When speciation occurs, it represents a branch, which is a single ancestral lineage that gives rise to 2 or more daughter lineages. And so each of these branches here mean that speciation has occurred in that family line. So let's practice one of these. If you're looking at this cladogram or phylogenetic tree, what organism descended first? So the organism that would end up descending first would be the lancelet, because it is the furthest down the tree. This lancelet could either be up on this branch or it could be down here at the root. But the one furthest down is going to be the one that descends first. What characteristics do the turtle and salamander share? If you notice here, we ended up with some characteristics on this root here. These characteristics are showing what changed between this species and this species. So speciation occurred between the lancelet and the lamprey because there was a vertebral column that had been developed. The lamprey and the tuna ended up causing speciation to create the tuna because now we see jaws present. And so the characteristics that the turtle and the salamander share are a vertebral column, because all the organisms upward have a vertebral column. Jaws, because all of these organisms have jaws. 4 walking legs. All of these organisms have 4 walking legs. Now, the salamander and turtle do not share the amniotic egg, because this is what is causing speciation between the salamander and the turtle. Next, which organisms are most closely related? We always say that the ones at the tips, at the end of the phylogenetic tree, are the ones that are most closely related because they have the most characteristics that are the same. So the turtle and the leopard all have vertebral column, jaws, 4 walking legs, amniotic egg. All 4 of those traits are the same, making these the most closely related based on their traits.